Thank you very much. I'm humbled to be presenting in front of you all today. Anyone could be presenting their own agency's experience, and I'm fortunate to be able to highlight ours this afternoon. As Robin said in my introduction, I started at Big Brothers Big Sisters in Calgary in April, not this past April, but the year before. So I've been here for 2 years, involved in the mentoring world. And so what I'd really like to talk about today is some of the work that we're doing. We certainly haven't arrived. I'm not going to profess to be an expert in anything or to say that we found the magic answer to outcome measurement and evaluation. And as my wise teacher Mark Cabage says, anyone who believes that they found the best practice that is actually an anti-innovation. Best practice is anti-innovation because you're constantly developing and you're constantly reworking and editing and learning, and you should be. And that's part of the continuous quality improvement cycle. So I'll share where we've come, and be really curious to have a conversation, and feel free to chime in at any time if there's something that I say that piques your interest, that you'd like to ask a question about, or that's something that resonates with you in your own organization and you want to share it, feel free. Okay. I think part of what's critical is when we want to go measure the impact of our work, we really have to go back to, and this ties in very well with the previous speaker in the room here. Was it Tori? Terry, who's talking about you really have to know what it is you're trying to achieve. What is the ultimate impact that you're trying to achieve? Because and in some organizations you'll think of that as your mission or your vision statement. At Big Brothers Big Sisters in Calgary area, our ultimate goal, our ultimate impact is that children and youth facing adversity have the relationships they need to become resilient and realize their full potential. So that's ultimately the long, lofty, ultimate impact, and really not necessarily accountable to measure at that broad a level. I was tuning into Michael Geringer's talk on the webinar last night, and he was saying one of the errors that agencies sometimes make when you go ahead and you want to evaluate something is to be too lofty and ambitious in what it is that you're hoping to evaluate. And really, can you really take full responsibility for our youth's resiliency? Like, are some of these concepts really sort of outside the line of sight of your own program intervention? So wanting to keep that a little bit in a parameter. So this is being sort of the ultimate impact that we'd be driving towards. What's interesting is when you start this work is looking at who it is that you're currently serving and who it is you want to serve. Because all the parts of outcome and evaluation work have to be so tightly aligned. And if you start off with, well, we just need tools to measure our outcome, but we really haven't looked at what is the intervention and who is the intervention for, and have we gone and realized that there's that goodness of fit between who we're serving, what their needs are, what we're intending to do, the goals of the program, the intervention of the program, how we're measuring it, and then the instrumentation. Sometimes we jump along right into the instrumentation. Oh, I've got a new tool to measure this, we're going to do that. Really have to look at who is it that you serve and who is it that you're planning on serving if this is a new piece of work. So at Big Brothers Big Sisters in Calgary, we've really seen over the last 2 years a shift away from this notion of any child who wants a mentor gets a mentor, to any child who needs a mentor gets a mentor. And who needs a mentor? For us, it's children and youth facing adversity. Now, if money was no object and you had all the mentors and mentees and a bunch of staff, yeah, mentoring is good for everybody. There's no question about it. But when you've got a wait list of 600 kids, 300 kids, and you've got this potent intervention that's called mentoring, one would think one should be judicious in how one uses this instrument of mentoring and this intervention to help people who are children and youth facing adversity. And that's sort of where we landed on that. This is just a quick infographic that we did at our organization to say, who is it that we're currently serving? We did a random sample of 50 files of children who are currently involved in our community one-to-one mentoring program, and we found that 4 or more of those 50 kids had, 52% of those children had experienced 4 or more adversities. Now, many of them are mapped to the ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, and the 10 items there, but there were also other adversities, such as being bullied at school, having lived in a shelter with your mother, having had a medically fragile sibling. We were looking at sort of the nature of adversities in a broad sense, and so we were interested in looking at that and saying, well, these are kids we currently serve. And this infographic, any of you that run a program can easily do this by going back, because if you've got good interviews, a good interview schedule, a good questionnaire that you're using at intake, you're already going to have some of this information. But what it enabled us to do was, this wasn't really rocket science to a lot of the staff, especially the intake staff who've been asking all these questions, to realize 42% of the sample talked about a history of domestic violence, 40% talked about having mental health problems, and that this information, financial distress, which I think is underreported at 26%, it's one of those areas that is a very poor question that no one likes to ask, no one likes to answer, so we know it's an underreport. 38% being bullied. Some of these others, sexual abuse. It wasn't that much a surprise to staff, but it really validated that we're currently serving children facing adversity. So it wasn't really scary for us to say, well, this is who we're focusing on, because we already were serving them. What it did become important to do was to, when we shared that to external stakeholders, they were like, what? I thought Big Brothers Big Sisters just gave a kid a friend, a kid from a single home. Like, isn't that the only thing you're dealing with? And so when we showed this, it was like, no, actually, the kids that we're serving have multiple adversities and have complex histories. We know that adversity is a normal and important part of healthy development. I can't imagine meeting a child or youth today that has not experienced some form of adversity. But we also know that relationships, having a solid, caring adult in your life, is critical to buffering the impact of that adversity. And looking at who it is you serve or who it is you want to serve, we started thinking about what if we started mapping our agency's sweet spot across two continuums, because we wanted to look at low adversity to high adversity. And we also wanted to look at in need of consistent supportive relationships, because we said, well, that's who we're serving. We're serving kids between 6 and 24 in Calgary who are facing adversity and who are in need of consistent nurturing relationships. But it was like, well, who? How does that fall? So within your own organization, you might say, well, gee, we're not really equipped to serve kids that have high adversity, high mental health needs, cutters, kids that are on the extreme end of the autism spectrum, a continuum. We're not prepared to deal with kids at this high end of adversity. We're more or less in the middle, or we're more or less in the low end. That would be different for everybody in the room and where your own organization feels that their sweet spot is. And then this whole idea of the need of a consistent supportive relationship. So if a young person comes in and they have two parents that care for them, and they understand that more is better when it comes to relationships for kids, and they just think it would be a good idea to have their little daughter, who's maybe shy at school, that their little daughter could benefit from having a big sister who also could be another important adult in their life. So they come into your agency. Well, you might determine that that little girl's needs are probably more on the low spectrum relative to some of the other clients you might serve, youth in care, who have no unpaid caregiver potentially in their life, and who are in real need of that support relationship. But if you rank them as low, and you might say the adversity is actually quite low too, so that they're falling in this box here, you might say, well, it's not that this young girl doesn't need services, but the question is, are we the best ones to provide it? Because if mom and dad also have financial needs, what about brownies? What about other groups in the community? Can they access that? So this is a really good conversation to have with your staff groups as your team, to say, where is our sweet spot? Do we feel we can serve maybe here, and kids that are here, or kids that are here? So I know internally that was a good conversation that we had, and our target group is children 6 to 24 in Calgary and area facing adversity and needing supportive, open to mentoring, which is important, and then looking at, well, what kind of adversities? So getting really like, let's operationalize the concepts of adversity. So we're looking at, well, children who are experiencing at least one of the following, and there's the list: being in care, socially isolated, poverty. We talked about, would there be any kids that, would there be kids that we wouldn't serve? And that was another good conversation. Where would we not be best positioned to serve? We had good dialogue around social economic status. Is there a reason we should be serving kids only that live in financial poverty? Or is relational poverty where we find our mandate to be most important? Maybe a child has lots of financial, maybe their parents have lots of sort of income, financial income, but maybe they're working all the time and this child's lonely. Lots of new research in childhood loneliness, some of which is connected to the natural supports framework, and they really have been identifying that as a very sort of unstudied phenomenon, is childhood loneliness. And especially after school hours, the middle years, there's lots going on there. So is that social poverty something that we need to pay attention to? Just getting really crystal clear. And what does it mean to have a supportive, consistent relationship? And where we've landed is really this whole notion of developmental relationship that is not ours. It belongs to the Search Institute, who developed, who have a beautiful resource on their website called I think Relationships First, and it's all about what is a developmental relationship. And then they've got this nice little handout. I went down to Minnesota and they went to their boot camp, and they talked about, well, these are the elements of a developmental relationship. One that expresses care, one that challenges growth, provides support, shares power, expands possibility. So I started reading them. I thought, well, these are good. These are what a relationship, a developmental relationship would look like. It includes some of those items that Jean Rhodes has identified as being critical components in a good mentoring relationship, like caring, consistency, but it also adds some other ones as well around expanding possibilities, which I think speaks to this whole increased awareness of that need for a big web of natural supports around children and youth, right? Not only bonding capital, but bridging capital. How am I, as a mentor, going to be introducing my little to other possibilities in the world around them, taking them to university, connecting them with places they might otherwise not see? So it's about broadening horizons. And so we really sort of hung our hat on this developmental relationships piece. What do children need? We thought, well, with the Circle project that was highlighted, part of that came for those of you who are with the Big Sisters organization and the CRM database. We discovered there's a little hidden doorway in there that has a beautiful needs assessment that has a long litany of needs, potential needs that families come to us wanting to address. Tracy will be able to tell you, I'm not exactly sure where it is. I think it's on the Child and Family Assessment tab, and then if you click a button, it's like very inconspicuous, it's like other. All of a sudden this big thing opens up, and it has this whole list of potential needs that families could say yes, yes. So we decided, well, why not? When families come in, we'll give them this big, long questionnaire, and they just have to tick and say, what are the needs that your child has, that you're coming to us for, and how would you rank them in terms of being a high need versus a low need? So we conducted this with 57 clients. We sort of point in time over a few months, and on average, there were 18.6 categories of concern per client, and 52% of those clients had more than 20 categories of concern. And what we did, because we like to make things complicated, is we took all of those categories and we actually subcategorized them, because in Ambrose University, through the Child Poverty Institute in Calgary, has done an interesting analysis of poverty from the lens of the child, sort of untethered from parental poverty, looking at these 4 types of poverty. We were most interested in self-perception, which is the child's view of themselves, as well as relational poverty, given the nature of our work. So the next, I think it's the next slide, you'll be like, what? I can't see anything. Yeah, that's it. It's okay that you can't see everything, but I just put it up there to show you that these were all of those, like challenges with interpersonal skills. These were all of the needs, and this is how we grouped them, clustered them in accordance with those dimensions of childhood poverty. And then what we did is, along the top, you'll see the 57 clients, and all the red is where they identified high needs. So you see some have a lot of areas of really high need, green is low need, and yellow is middle. So it enabled us to look at per client how many are coming in with so many needs, but also across categories. What are the... Did
you do this interview stuff?
No. We did it when the families first came in for an info session. We gave them a survey, and then when they came in with the engagement staff to do their face-to-face interview, the staff had already reviewed what had been filled out, and so afterwards there was an opportunity, well, it was a great tool for them to have that conversation with them, as well as to say after the interview that, I'm curious based on what you said, you know, that you indicated it's a low need. Is this something that you maybe identified as a high need? So it became sort of a.
So the untethered children's, is that what we're looking at, is the children's or no?
This is all the kids. So this is what parents were asked to say, what are the needs of your child?
Okay.
Of all these needs. We just did this on our own in our own back room because we wanted to know specifically how many of them are related to different types of poverty. One of the reasons is because funders keep wanting us to serve kids dealing with poverty. Yeah. And some of these donors are only serving funding agencies that deal with poverty. And it's like, okay, number one, we have to get better at measuring poverty because we're not currently asking the question in a way that provides us with the answers we need. And then when you go and you actually talk to staff on the front line, you're like, well, we asked them, but we tell them it's optional. Well, actually, it's not going to be optional anymore. I really do want to know cost of, like, what is the income? And as long as we explain it has nothing to do with whether you're being served, it's a funding requirement. But what we also thought is, why miss an opportunity to make the argument and push back to funders and say, there's different kinds of poverty for kids. And we want to present this notion. Some thought that was very interesting. And still no funding. Very interesting, but we need the money. But a lot of people were curious about that. And it was important for us. What we really looked at is the areas of concern identified by parents. 88% had emotional coping challenges or difficulties as their main reason they were coming to us for services. Peer difficulties, poor self-esteem, of course, limited access to activities. We could anticipate that. Lack of friends, social isolation, challenges with interpersonal communication. And I'm presenting this all to say that who your client is and what you intend to do with them completely drives what goals you should set for your program and the outcomes, right? At the same time, the goals of your program should also very much align with who it is that you're serving. So it all needs to be a tight fit. So what we do, mentoring as an intervention. My world is in the clinical world before I started with Big Brothers Big Sisters, so everything was an intervention. I don't know that until we were informed by the brain science and the potency of mentoring and relationships and what they actually do in terms of building brain architecture. I wanted to have on our website for mentors and the people who wanted to volunteer, do you want to build a child's brain? But everyone so far has told me I'm not allowed to say that. But it's actually true. Mentors build brains. They help build brain architecture, and as such, it is an intervention. It's not just kind of let's just give them a friend, it's nice to hang out. And we know that because research has shown that all the positive benefits of mentoring. So what we do community-based mentoring, we do school-based mentoring. And these, in terms of what we do, these are the elements of effective mentoring that Mentor has. This is, if you haven't seen this, and I know Mike Behringer talked about it because he wrote it, he was part of writing it. That Elements of Effective Practice document on the Mentor website is amazing. It's so detailed that if you didn't know anything about mentoring, which I didn't do when I started 2 years ago, I read that. I mean, people were kind of telling me what it was about, but when I actually sat down and read this, I thought, wow, this is crystal clear in what is the best practice in each of these areas, or promising practice. So that's what we do. I also appreciated during the webinar Mike Behringer's concept of the evolution of a mentor and what we expect from mentoring. So he talked about in the early phase, in the 90s, mentor as a friend. Then the second phase, mentoring as a conduit to expand social capital and other opportunities. And how now we're in this phase where the mentor-mentee relationship is seen as the context in which other evidence-based practices can be delivered to the young person. So the mentor is a friend plus can deliver other things. So whether that's tutoring or academic, trying to drive towards academic outcomes, maybe it's trying to drive to employment. So the relationship has to be there. The developmental relationship has to be there because without the relationship, nothing else happens. And he also referred in the webinar to clinical work. In the clinical world, they've made $1 gazillion on selling new books and new methods, whether it's narrative therapy, brief solution-focused therapy, the Milan version of therapy, psychoanalytic therapy. The research is clear. The relationship with the therapist is the #1 predictor of outcome. Well, of course, anyone who's been to therapy or a doctor, for that matter, will know that the relationship determines whether you listen or not. So we might have a great intervention if there's no relationship, though, first. then the child's not going to trust you, they're not going to listen to you, and so it's key. But it also provides an opportunity to do these other preventative activities, especially when you're dealing with children who have risk factors. And then the fourth and future phase really had to do with critical mentoring and what Tori talks about in terms of societal level change, so that we can eliminate the need for mentoring. We'll just work ourselves out of a job, and that would be really nice because that would mean that kids were surviving and thriving, and that the community itself and natural supports were able to provide positive development for kids. But also talking about leveraging mentoring to address the root causes. So we're not there, but I'm interested, but it is interesting if you think about it, how the conceptualization of mentoring as a field has evolved. How we do it. So that's what we do. Now it's about how we do it. Well, at Big Brother Users in Calgary, and I'm curious to know about your own experiences in your agencies, you know, we're big on research and theory-informed practice. There's lots of new paradigms that get introduced about, well, have you thought about it this way? Or there's new research here. For us, the brain science and the neuroscience behind supporting relationships was key, is key. We were involved in a 2-year project with 14 other agencies, 10 from the United States, 4 from others from Alberta, looking at the application of neuroscience in the field of child and youth, whether that's counseling or in our case mentoring, and how we were going to embed and infuse that. The Service Institute Developmental Relationships, great website, great resources, that's also been important. Trauma-informed approaches, everyone, I mean, that's taken on a huge surgence in the school system and counseling agencies. And what we say is that for us in mentoring, it's really about being trauma-wise, being trauma-informed, not trauma-specific. We're not counseling children about abuse experiences, but what we are saying to mentors is, you know, that whole notion of it's not that what's wrong with the child, it's what's happened to the child, and how does that affect you? And we'll talk in a minute about you know, the training implications that has for mentors, because it's no longer about, well, I'm going to do my ISM, going into the school for an hour, and this is what my plan is as a mentor. I arrive and find that my level is completely dysregulated from whatever's happened that day. Maybe they got into a fight at recess with a friend. Maybe they just had a test that they didn't know they had to study for. Or whatever the case may be, they're completely dysregulated. So as a mentor, what we say is if you go in there for an hour and you help regulate, you know, Bruce Perry, he talks about regulate, relate, and reason. Well, nobody can access the reasoning part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, if they are in a state of hypervigilance and they're in that flight or fight because something's been triggered for them related to their trauma, related to their history. So we say, if you go in there for an hour and you're shooting hoops or you're running around the school and you allow that child to go into the back end of the classroom after an hour and be able to actually take in the information, that's huge. You know, and that's what we're asking our mentoring coordinators to do, is to talk to, provide match support in a different way. It's like not one activities, it's about regulation, it's about what are the types of things you've done to support executive functioning. So we're talking in a different language, and when I first started 2 years ago, the word executive functioning, the frontline staff were just like, not comfortable saying that. And it's really fun now because I go to my office and I'm hearing everybody using it. Oh, you know, I've talked to them about the executive functioning and what they could be doing, and I'm thinking, this is just awesome. But it takes a while because it's a second language for us, for me. Social emotional learning is also big across all systems right now, and lucky for us, mentoring is all about the relationship, so that fits really well. The outcomes, we'll look at that in a minute. Natural supports approach. In mentoring, how we frame it is, we facilitate a natural support, because our hope is that we pull out from being formally involved with a family, with a match, and they move on into a natural relationship, which many do. And when we did an analysis of why people were hanging on, we had matches that were 3 years long and there was no problems. And so I found it was really a waste of staff time. So here are hiring staff that have a degree in social work, and there's a match that's doing well, that's had no problems. Meanwhile, I've got a staff person chasing them down, hunting them down to ask a litany of rote questions that everyone's tired of answering and everyone's tired of asking. It's like, that doesn't seem quite right. So when asking matches, well, why are you staying on as a formal match? Why don't you just transition to a natural match? We found that the major, well, there were a couple of factors, but one of the major ones was they wanted to still have access to tickets. It's like, well, it's really expensive to be a mentor, and we love the free hockey tickets or whatever. The other thing is they like being called a big, you know, like they wanted that investment in that. And the third thing was they wanted to, what if something ever did happen? They still wanted to be able to support. So we're in the middle now of launching our agency's alumni strategy, so that can be met. You can still be a big, you can be an alumni. We'll still have tickets available to alumni because the people who provide the tickets make no distinction between an active match and a former match. So anyway, we're working our way around that. And then the Foundations of Caregiver Support, which is a children's services document that deals with kids in care, talking about what are the foundations that they want all caregivers, that's foster parents, psychologists, mentors, therapists, counselors, everyone. And it's the three components are child development, which is also with the brain science, trauma, and grief and loss. Some of Darla Henry's work that she's done in her 357 model looking at grief and loss, really important area of work. And then there's another sort of Indigenous lens applied to that. That's on the website too, if you wanted to, or on Google, if you looked at the Foundations of Caregiver Support. It's a good read and it's short. These are the concepts. I'm not going to spend much time, I don't even know, but sort of this whole idea of the trauma, ACEs affects your whole life, but you can learn new skills to get where you need to thrive. And of course, Jack Shonkoff, who's I have a secret crush on, he's with the Harvard on the Developing Child. I don't know if I can say that out loud, but I do. I did. He's with the National Scientific Council on Developing Child. He's real brilliant. And this is a quote that talks about whether the burdens come from the hardships of poverty, the challenges of parental substance abuse or serious mental illness, the stresses of war, the threats of recurrent violence or chronic neglect, or a combination of factors. The single most common finding is that children who end up doing well have had at least one stable and committed relationship with a supportive parent, caregiver, or other adult. So this is the science that backs up our work. This is the science that says a relationship isn't a nice to have, it's a needs to have. It's as critical to children's development as food, water, and shelter. That's a brave thing to say, and it's true. And we can't be afraid to say it. We have to be bold in our assertion about what it is that we do and the impact that it has, so that we can, well, for a number of reasons, including the fact that so many agencies are so reliant on donations and don't have the amount of government funding, United Way funding, FCSS funding that we should be having as mentoring organizations. I was shocked to come in and look at our diversification of revenue pie and say, oh my God, we're that reliant on donations. I wasn't used to that because I came from worlds of homelessness and domestic violence. And other contracts come in here, there, and everywhere. But here it's like, well, mentoring is kind of, it's a nice thing. Oh, actually it's not. So let's put it where it needs to be. A trauma-informed approach takes into account understanding of trauma in all the aspects and places a priority on safety, choice, and control. Important. And just the idea that for, when we're talking to mentors, behavior tells a story, right? Bad things happen to me. They change my reaction to stress. I'm now always on guard and it's exhausting. I'm doing the best I can. And I'm stuck in the past, coping and surviving, but not thriving. The good news is, though, and what we know is that mentoring helps foster resiliency. We're going to talk about that in a minute, but one of the things we did was we said, okay, so if we expect mentors to do different things, how is our training going to change? Because I think that the Strong from the Start training that for National Big Brothers Big Sisters, I think that is more in line with those earlier models of what mentoring was like. And now we're having to say, well, if we're saying that it's about providing that friendship, but it's other things, what is it that we need to know? And I know that Michael talked about AMP. They're redoing their training for new volunteers, and it's going to include a lot of these same elements. But what we've done just as an agency is we've made it mandatory for any volunteer that you're actually doing two-part training. You're going to do that Strong from the Start training, which we have adapted to put in some information on developmental relationships. But then you're also doing a part 2, which is talking about brain architecture, executive functioning, adverse childhood experiences, toxic stress, and how mentors can facilitate resiliency. And we've evaluated that, of course, every time in developing mindful mentoring. Every time there was a session, we surveyed, is it too much, is it too complicated, is it not enough, is it too long, what is it you liked, what you didn't like, and that we've go over that.
Are you guys able to share that?
Yes, absolutely. The file is humongous, so I can't email it. And what I'm waiting for is by the end of the month, we're going to have a facilitator guide to go with it. Because what I thought would be nice is, in addition to the slide, so what we're going to do is share it Matthew and National First and say like, this is what we want to do. Is it okay to share? Because we're all about sharing. But I thought a facilitator guide would be nice. It will have the slide, and then it will have what the facilitator could say, so that if I was new in an agency, I could read that and have a really solid idea of like, here's some options for videos, here are the links to videos, a real practical piece that we could share with everybody who wants it. I'm not going to go into detail here because some of you will already know it, but it's just about some of the main concepts: executive functioning skills, those parts of the brain that really help kids problem solve, organize, delay gratification, stop tapping on their desks, waiting their turn in line, understanding empathy, being able to read someone else's cues, being able to express emotions in an effective way, self-regulation, those really basic, important, critical life skills. And whenever there's a child that's, in trouble at school, it's because of one of those things, typically, that's happened. We talked to the mentors about the ACEs study. In fact, 2 nights ago, I was in a theater with them showing the new movie, Resilience, talking about ACEs and what the other hopeful part of that is. We talk about toxic stress and how mentoring buffers the impact of toxic stress, how toxic stress is a bad thing for kids because their stress response system is chronically activated, which makes them hypervigilant to cues and misread cues in social settings. So you've got a kid in a classroom and somebody goes and taps them on the shoulder asking them for a pencil, and there's a huge overreaction. It's because that child's already in a state of hyper alert based on how their stress response system is working. We talk about how relationships are actually key to start buffering the impact of toxic stress rather than cementing it. Because what we can do is that we know that, when I talk about the brain science and when it's all about creating new neural pathways in children's brains, and we know that up until the age of 25, that whole executive functioning part of the brain is still developing. And that was the most hopeful story for our field that could have ever been told, because until 10 years ago, everybody thought 0 to 6, 0 to 6. If you haven't got them then, all is done. And we're like, well, we serve them starting at 6, so what's that mean for us? Now it's like, oh, that's okay, guys, because we've got the 25 actually to help build a better brain. So anyway, it was really good news. And then, of course, resiliency and the ability to recover quickly from difficult conditions, be able to cope with adversity in a way, manage emotions in a healthy way. And the mindful mentoring, we talk about being trauma-informed, the safety, the strength-based approach, focus on self-determination and empowerment, and then the 3 R's strategy. Okay, so our intended impact in terms of our short-term outcome is all around the developmental relationship stuff. That through an intentional match between a mentor and mentee, professionally supported by staff, children and youth form this developmental relationship, which are close connections through which young people discover who they are, gain abilities to shape their lives, and learn how to interact with and contribute to the world around them. Lots of noises. I'm just going to take a look at my time. Okay. So basically, these are the elements of developmental relationships. You can go on and read at length on the website if you're interested in them. But it's what the Search Institute has found in their research is that both parents, teachers, and mentors do really well in the first 3 categories of expressing care, challenging growth, and provide support when they rate themselves. But in terms of sharing power and expanding possibilities, they rate themselves less favorably. When I went down for the training, they asked us all to think about some young person in our life and where we rated ourselves. And we were also low on sharing power and especially expanding possibilities. And there's a tool they have called the intentionality tool, which asks people exactly that. How do you rank yourself? And we are actually starting to give that to our mentors and asking them how they're rating themselves and where they're lower, to talk to the mentoring coordinator about ways that they can, things that they can do. Midterm outcomes for us are really about protective and promotive skills within the context of mentoring. A lot of people talk about protective, which are risk mitigating, but the promotive is actually, okay, so I'm going to prevent bad things from happening, but can I also promote good things from happening? It's like, sure you can. And we're looking at enhanced support, expanding social connections, and improving cognitive, social, emotional competence. CASEL are the experts on social emotional learning. They have 5 dimensions that are key to their work. If you go on the CASEL website, you can download this really lengthy Some might find an interesting book on tools that you can choose from that are all approved with the stamp of approval from CASEL to measure self. That's an outcome that you're looking at. So in addition to those 5, there's 3 additional ones that we're measuring which have to do with personal responsibility, optimistic thinking, and goal-directed behavior. I've asterished the ones that I also think are where there's a convergence between social emotional learning skills and executive functioning, because some of them around self-management are both. So these are the areas that we are at Big Brothers and Sisters Calgary are measuring. And our theory of change is also, I mean, this is kind of a draft, but we're kind of looking at, here's who we serve, here's our ultimate impact, this is what we do, how do we do it, and then our intended impact. And because we know that if we do these things here, that in lay speak, children will have more confidence, more self-esteem, they'll be happier. But when we try to go to people, to funders, and say, well, our program will lead to greater self-esteem, they're like, that's soft. Like self-esteem, it's too soft. I'm like, well, isn't it important that kids like themselves? But the general other person out there, the individual donor, may like to know about kids' self-esteem and that they're feeling happy. When you ask teachers what's been the difference, oh, he's happier. He's getting along better with friends, so that's good. But we think this leads to that, and we think all of this leads to resiliency. So the measurement tool that we're using for our social emotional, we're using 2. Okay, well first we're going to measure the relationships. Okay, your short-term outcome is a relationship. Already, there's some tools available out there to measure that relationship. I heard on the webinar from Mike Geringer that there's a toolkit, there's an outcome measurement toolkit on the Mentor website, and I think it's called Measuring Effective Outcomes. He said yesterday that in June they're going to have new tools out there that measure developmental relationships. In the meantime, I've taken the categories here, and we've created surveys that ask, so this is for a mentor survey, asking them to rate themselves. How much conscious attention do you find yourself giving or creating opportunities to take action in these ones? They talk about showing my mentee they can trust me, giving my mentee focused attention, all the way up. So we're tapping into these dimensions. We're also asking the mentee at post, how often is the statement true? My mentor is someone I can trust. My mentor pays attention when we're together, makes me feel known and valued. Again, tapping in here. The Search Institute is just about finished validating and norming a tool that's going to be measuring this. We don't have it yet. They've been almost close to having it ready for a number of months. And now I'm on their banned list. I think I'm on the X list. You know, send an email and it's like, no, bounce back. Because I'm like, when's the survey coming? When's the survey coming? So when I was actually down there in person last month, I said to Mary Schrader, when's the survey coming? She said, it's coming soon. I said, okay. Well, in the meantime, we want to start measuring this, so we're going to use some of our own. Measuring, we're just going to use this and adapt, and she's fine with that until we get to the other one. Social emotional is DESA. DESA is the Devereux Strengths Assessment Scale. It is normed for children in K to 8. It's completed by the adult rater, a teacher or a parent. We tested it with some of our mentors. Our mentors, there were a number of items on the DESA questionnaire they weren't able to complete because they weren't around the child enough and for long enough. So to be a rater, you have to be in the child's life. If you're rating it for the past 4 weeks, is how it goes, and you have to have been with that child 2 or 3 days each week for 4 weeks. So it's either a teacher, a parent, our mentors just didn't have enough knowledge about certain areas of that child's life to be able to compute it properly. These are the competencies. Again, the raters, this is all information you can find if you want to go on DESA. What's cool about DESA is that for every student, so a parent comes in, they complete the DESA. You can tell for those 8 dimensions on social emotional learning and social emotional skills, this is the needs, this is the typical, this is the strengths. Parent feedback is, we really liked this questionnaire. It asked all kinds of, it was all about the strengths. It's like, well, yeah, it is all about the strengths. But we also know here that this is around decision making. We're able to go back to the actual test and say, like, where was it that the score was low here? Not only that, we can communicate to parent and mentor about what they can do about this. Like, what does this mean and what can they do about it? Because using, if you get involved with this and you go to the profiles, you're given information on each of these domains and tools and techniques and strategies to deal with them. So it's very helpful. It's like an intervention piece as well. It's not just, oh, here's the score, but we're also looking at it pre and post. We can also say, if you're a mentoring coordinator and you've got 50 kids, I can do an aggregate composite, I can do an aggregate profile for all your kids. So I can see how many of your kids are falling where, which means I can balance the acuity, because you don't want some people having kids that have a lot of complexity and other people not. So there's lots of ways to do it. The Washoe County School District Social Emotional Competency Assessment is another one we're using. This is for young people. They will fill it out. Again, those 5 domains. This is for grades 4 and above. At the beginning of September, they're going to have a high school version, but for now, it's from grades 4 to grade 8. Just that's the way the states is, and so we're going to be implementing that. We do up this thing on like the strategy, like what are our survey strategies? So each of you in your own organization will have your own version of when you're going to test, who you're going to test, and what you're going to test there. So you know, and it's different based on for community-based and school-based. The timing is always a big thing, you know, and this is one of the things that I think has led to underreporting of our impact in mentoring, is that there's no right answer on the timing. It's so hard, because if you time that intake, it could be 8 months before you match them to our organization. Now, others aren't like that. But if there's any length of time between intake and matching, you've got the threat to the validity of your measurement being history and maturation. So that's one thing, especially when you're, like I said, you're waiting a year and the child's still not matched. If, on the other hand, you present your intake form or your survey form at the initial match meeting, that kid is so excited, everything's great. So, I mean, we were getting no effect because they were like everything was happy. And then it was also happy in post. So it's like, oh, okay, good and gooder. Not too sure, but didn't really give us what we wanted. So there's going to be a threat in inherent in timing when you're measuring kids, which is why we found it so critical that we could start triangulating our data. So if I can get multiple sources of people talking about the same construct, like social awareness or self-awareness, okay, and I can get a teacher rating on the DESA, I can get a parent rating on the DESA, and I can get a child themselves or a youth themselves talking about where they rate on that same dimension. I then have 3 checkpoints to triangulate my impact, and I feel very confident if I get a similar result in those 3. That is, of course, ultimate what you can get. I'll settle for 2. To date, we've not done as well with parent data as we want to. We've got qualitative, but we haven't been doing this in a rigorous way.
How many surveys do you give?
Well,
because I mean we have the match monitoring we have to do already. So my question is and the intake and the questions and all that kind of stuff. So this is on top.
Well, because this is at the INM, when they initially do it. Yeah, this is on top, but we actually pared down. When I started, we had a number of questions that was a homegrown survey, and it was like 3 to 4 pages of this survey, and there were questions that I didn't even understand where they came from. They were part of history, like, oh, these were ones from YMCA when we did something with them. These are ones we asked for this reason. This is one we asked for this reason, because we were looking at the 5 C's of personal development as a model. So it was a bunch of questions that were all put together. But whenever we did, and my whole thing was, well, we can't just throw a bunch of these questions and a bunch of that question. Now we have a tool that's not valid or reliable, because it's not been tested. It's not a real instrument. So even though I can argue that I think these questions are tapping into a certain construct, whether it's self-esteem or level of peer connectedness, or school satisfaction, or school attachment, if I don't have a valid and norm tool, I can't actually say that those questions are indicators that actually drive to that concept, even if I think it, even if I've seen another one like it. So my whole thing is, let's get rid of everything that's not a valid and norm tool. I mean, other than, you know, what's for national, but you have to ask that. But even the match support questions, yes, you have to ask certain ones, but there's also the ability to add other ones. And when you're starting to ask questions like connected to our development of relationships and the other opens around social emotional, we definitely are added to them.
Like, I'm just thinking of a teacher, for example, and you're gonna ask them to fill out this survey, and then you're gonna ask them to tell you how the math was going at the beginning, and like, I just wondered how much pushback
Okay,
against that
it's a good
program.
point, and it's a good point, and I have a few things I think about that. Number one, teachers right now have to fill out that nomination form. If they, in our world anyway, they fill out this nomination form. It's either a teacher or the guidance counselor, whoever the liaison is. That form is typically poorly filled out. Teachers don't want to commit their name on paper, and they don't want to sign things. So they have this conversation with the mentoring coordinator who takes a few notes and jots down. Sometimes they'll complete some of it, but not that much. We're providing a service and we're getting zero funding from Board of Education. Right? We're taking our staff, we're going to that school, and we're providing a service to their students. In many cases, through team mentoring, we're giving the teacher a whole prep period, and we are asking for what? Right? We've asked for so little in terms of information on clients that it's compromised my ability to clearly articulate the impact my programs have in school. When I can't do that, I'm going to lose funding. When I lose funding, I don't have programs. I lay off staff. My team mentoring program, my in-school mentoring program is gone. So, my choice is this. I have to have information. The DESA comes in a mini version of 8 questions. If there's that much pushback, and I think there will be less pushback because they can get an immediate, they'll like to see the profile because that will mean something to them. But if there's pushback, we'll do the 8 items. If teachers can't do the 8 items, then I think we need to pick another school. You know, I think it's our time. We started.
I can't pick another school because I live in one school.
That's a problem. But I honestly think it's time to push back a little bit because I think it's like, well, this school wants us to do 2 semesters because it works out for their leadership program. Yeah, but we know that it's actually better for a child to have the same mentor for a full year than to have 6 weeks here and 6 weeks there because every Friday's off. Like, it's time for us to push back and say, yeah, I could deliver anything the teacher wants, but it's not going to be quality. When you're telling me I've got 4 sessions, and they're going to have a different mentor in the next term, it's kind of like, let's push that a little bit, right? Because it's our brand and it's our name on the intervention. Anyway, I know my time is up, so I think I probably mentioned things around the considerations. Thank you.
I'm just so glad you're the last speaker, because just so lively and keeping us going.
Awake.
I don't want to wake up the fire, so and now we're all inspired and we're trying to close down a little bit, but that means good things for driving home to Calgary, hopefully. No, it was wonderful.
Thank you, it was great, I enjoyed talking to you.
Oh, wonderful, and we do have a chance now, I think we should give Cynthia a couple minutes for questions.
I was going to say, yeah, as we're loading up the next exercise, I know that's a ton of information, and we will share with you her presentation, as well as all of those pieces, if that's okay. She referenced a few partners we have in there, the Mentor, the Search Institute, the Elements of Effective Practice. All of those pieces are available at the AMP website, and we'll be putting them into the digital goodie bag that you get. As well, in your bags, those USB keys, some of those resources, there's digital copies of them there, so make sure to fire those things up. Don't wipe them out and make mixtapes for your lovers.
If anyone has questions, if anyone has a question they don't want to ask you or they think of it later, I'm in conversation.
Please, great.
What's the amount of time a mentor can spend with the students to have a positive impact over a long term? Is there a good answer for that, or is that dependent on relationship, or is it kind of a guideline?
I have a response to that, and it brings me back to another point is, what I've read in anyway about in-school mentoring in general is that, and Tracy, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what they're saying is, if it's a full year school program, and there's a minimum number of weeks that they recommend, and I believe it's 8, I want to say. What do you think? 16. Yeah. I think there's a minimum.
16 contacts through the year. Or 8.
Yeah, I mean, we try to go the whole school year. If you're doing ISM and you start, usually by the time the mentor's up and running, it's October. Let's say it's by the time. So if you can go from October till June, that's what we're looking for ISM. But the team mentoring programs,
is often children. And I think the other part of that too to keep in mind is it's not always sort of how many months or how many weeks.
Yeah.
It's duration can come in different forms. So there are some programs where they might be meeting 1 hour a day for 2 weeks, right? And that's sort of the program because they're set up as a practicum. So there's any number of different ways that you can look at that. But what you're really looking for is the development of that relationship and the impact that that can have. There have been some teen studies that have shown that the mere fact of having a mentor, even if it is a different mentor from semester 1 to semester 2, like the fact that they've had a mentor for a full year has also led to impact. So it depends on the profile of the child and what it is the outcome is you're looking for. So there's different variations, and that's where understanding the client, I think, is really important, and also looking at your outcome and the training that you provide.
Perfect.
I also think that one of the things that's the biggest challenge for us in this field with measurement is fidelity of the intervention. Because last year I had 1,700 or close to 1,700 matches through our organization. I mean, they're all doing different things. They're all having different relationships, just the nature of it. It's not like I have 3 counselors that I know that they're using they're trained in this approach and whatever. So there's that variability, but with the cross-age mentoring, I believe it was clear that there are certain components that should be followed. Certain components that should be followed, and in any of the group programs, if there's a curriculum involved, not wavering off the curriculum, because then you're measuring apples and oranges. If it's like, oh yeah, well here are 8 weeks, but I'm going to use them as guidelines to Go Girls or Game On. Use these as guidelines. And instead, my favorite hobby is to make flower pots, so I'm going to do that.
Right.
Like, once you start doing that, then
Your
not
methodology
measuring.
should, Okay.
Everything I know, anything I know about mentoring and in terms of its effectiveness comes from the experts. And so the book Youth Mentoring is my Bible, and it usually gets updated every few years. And anything on the Chronicle of mentoring from Gene Rhodes and then mentoring. They're the experts.
I have just one question, because just trying to tie it back to Jason's presentation, it also comes about surveys and potential survey fatigue. Do you ever see an opportunity, would you ever find access to some of the existing data, say data coming out of the school or a school authority, of having access to that data, adding to the data that you're collecting through your day-to-day, might eliminate potentially some need for baseline data or survey data?
I really like the idea. So 2 things. Survey fatigue is real. Every time we talk about introducing a survey, I sit down and say, I want to know, how does this affect our questions? And what are we getting rid of now? Because I don't want fatigue. Every time you get fatigue, you get inaccuracy. You get people tired and they're answering all the time, you know, and then you got garbage. So I'd rather have fewer and better. So that's a real thing. As for the schools sharing data or their information on students, I can't get some schools to sign a checklist of what our role is in the school. So first of all, I started with the memorandum, the MOUs we needed for schools, and them saying, well, we're not allowed to sign anything. We're principals, but we're not allowed to sign anything. You need to go to the board. So you go to the Board of Education, you get an MOU, but that's very high level. What you really want is just this whole thing of this is what we're going to do in the school. This is what you're going to, like an agreement. So we created an agreement. Still, 2 teachers saying, I'm not signing, I can't sign. But we've been in your school for 10 years delivering this, why are you not signing it? So yeah, there's challenges with sharing information. They'll often share it verbally, which is why our staff end up completing notes on, tell me about this kid, because they don't have to put their name on it, but it's disheartening.
It is, but I think the time has come that we have to be able to make the case, and you know, we get education data through the Children's Data Lab, and we can drill it down to a population level, but I think, you know, the government departments have got to be able to see, they're also asking for seeing outcomes, and particularly Alberta Mentoring Partnership, and some of the outcomes are happy because kids are happier in school, they're finishing school, etc. There has to be, in my view, more openness to giving them access to
Well, absolutely. And one of our programs, the All In for Youth, is specifically about high school completion. So all we want to know is how many of the youth, we're in there with a number of other partners in Calgary. All we want to know is how many that participate in mentoring graduate from high school. And the United Way cannot get that information from the Board of Education. They cannot. United Way of Calgary, who's in 21 schools doing All In for Youth, cannot get the Board of Education to give them a list of the kids who graduate. So it's an issue.
But we're trying to help.
Yeah, thank you.
And that's
Well, thank
something
you
where,
again.
yeah.
Thank you.
So